Okay, great. So welcome everyone, welcome speakers, welcome guests. Thank you very much indeed for giving up a small section of your evening to talk about your experiences of moving to the UK from South Africa. This really was born out of, just admit some more people, out of what seemed to be an emerging need, driven by our esteemed colleague Nikita, receiving many questions about how to go about doing this. So we've got a wonderful panel of speakers here, four fantastic people to talk about their own experiences of moving from South Africa to the UK. And without any further ado, I will let them take over. And Nina, I believe, is heading up. Nina, tell us about your experiences and introduce yourself for us.
Wonderful. So hi, everyone. Can you all hear me fine? Just checking. Great. Thumbs up. Awesome. So I left South Africa in 2006. So I just celebrated my 17 years here this month. And it feels crazy that I've been here 17 years. But I qualified as an organizational psychologist in South Africa. Did the internship, wrote the board exam, started my work experience, started actually working following the qualifying through the board exam. I don't know if you still have to write a board exam, but I had to in 2006 with the HPCSA, and then moved here on a 2-year working visa. In those days, you could get those 2-year working visas. Realized I loved it, and then switched because of the qualification we had in South Africa to a highly skilled migrant visa, which they don't offer anymore. Okay, so that was quite an empowering way to get you, having had this incredible qualification and professional registration in South Africa. I could switch my visa to be a highly skilled person here. What I found landing here was that to navigate, I had just qualified, I had just written that board exam, done all that portfolio of work, to now have to do it all again through the British Psychological Society, I decided not to. So I maintained my registration in South Africa as an occupational psychologist and have never transferred to the British Psychological Society and what they tend to call here as an occupational psychologist, whereby we call it industrial or organizational. I didn't do the switch. I was tired from the studying and having to do all that. What I found coming here, specifically in the world of psychometrics, which a lot of us are working from an assessment perspective, is every assessment organization wants you to retrain in their specific assessment. So even though you did the OPQ in South Africa, you're now in the UK and they want you to redo it because they're different franchises and they're different pretty much organizations. So slowly over the 17 years, I've built up my psychometric portfolio, and I didn't invest all that money upfront. No one has ever checked my organizational psychology registration. No one has ever checked my degree. I call myself an organizational psychologist. It's one of the biggest differences having that psychology degree in human resources here. So if you are planning to go into an organization in-house as opposed to into a consultancy or one of the assessment houses, having that psychology background is very sought after. And I've seen that throughout my career. So that's me. In 17 years, I've just worked in different organizations in finance, telco, and I'm now global head of talent for The Body Shop. So I'm not even working as a psychologist, but I use it every day in what I do. So that's my brief story. And I think I'm handing over to Josh now to introduce himself and his journey.
That was very succinct. Thank you, Nina. So hey everyone, fellow South African and Cape Townian here. I'm Josh. I came over 5 years ago. And I trained in South Africa and I registered with HPCSA, did my internship, board exam, etc. And I worked there for a few years. I then came over and I did transfer my qualification over to the Healthcare Profession Council, so the HCPC, which is like the HPCSA. And then also the bit that's the other leg is the BPS, the British Psychological Society. And that entailed me, so because I had worked in South Africa and because I had registered in South Africa, I studied at UCT. I had to go and get every course. There's like a form that you fill in, and it was every course module that I did. I had to go to Suki Goodman, who was the head of the department, and she had to stamp it. Transcripts, you pay a bunch of money. And I mean, I think it was around £1,500 then, handily. My work paid for that once I had joined them. So if you can, I would either wait till you join an organization, because they're quite, the bigger banks, some of the other organizations, I've only worked in banking so far, they seem to be quite supportive of that. So if you can, they do that for you. And I registered then as a chartered psychologist. So the difference is, here you then become a chartered psychologist with occupational psychology behind it. I've found that to be quite the superpower here. Just to kind of echo what Nina said around the psychology bit, because it is quite difficult to become chartered in the UK. So the way they do it here is you do your master's, and then you would start to work. And then over a period of time, you build your portfolio. It's very timely, quite, again, costly. But so people tend to veer away from that. Only when you're a bit more senior do you then get your sort of chartership. So it was a real benefit to me, kind of landing and going in. As Nina said, psychometrics are quite freely available here. So there's something called the PAA, or the what's it called? The ability and personality testing, which you can do through the BPS. So just again, for all the many acronyms, BPS, British Psychological Society, they offer, it's a 2-day training. So you could do it through SHL, for example, when you're here. And that allows you to be a registered test user. So it's the RTQ, you registered test user, something. And that allows you to use psychometrics in the UK. So you don't even have to be a chartered psychologist. Like in South Africa, you either have to be a psychometrist or a psychologist to do the assessments. Here you don't. So if that's your initial step in, it's much cheaper, and that can support you if that's what you want to kind of kick off doing. I found to be, so I started working in the banking space. I now work at NatWest. I was in a building society nationwide before then for the last 5 years, and I head up assessments. So their requirement was they were looking for specifically a chartered psychologist to kind of do that role. And I guess that's me in a nutshell.
Josh,
And
if I could ask, sorry, actually, by the way, for all attendees here tonight, they're absolutely, one, if you have a question, you can either unmute and just jump in, or pop up your hand, or please pop it into the chat. Any questions at all? This is really a session for your benefit. So any thoughts or queries that come to your mind, please do pop them in. But we'll also have a section after everyone's spoken where we can open it up to a Q&A section. But I just wanted to touch on something that you mentioned, where you said that being chartered was it, am I right by saying you said being chartered was almost, was a bit of a superpower here?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? And if people don't have the opportunity, or the organization doesn't sponsor it in that direction, how might it block you? How does it help, and how could it hinder?
So I had worked I just finished university, and I had worked for maybe 3 years before. So coming to the UK, I went from working in a consultancy in South Africa to now working in an organization with 15,000 people, 18,000 people. And I found that people tended to listen when you say you're a psychologist. You have something to say. And I think it's quite beneficial in building credibility quite quickly. You probably could do that as an organizational psychologist too. You've gone through that piece, absolutely. But the role that I first landed in, which was maternity cover, again, I would strongly suggest maternity covers are a great way to also get into an organization quite quickly. Sorry, I can hear the buzzer for the oven now going. So I found that I wasn't chartered as I got in, because I was still doing all my paperwork. So I think it kind of is a wider umbrella that I found really helpful. I also felt it helped me with my little imposter syndrome kind of going on in the background of where I am. So I think that can be it. You can do many other roles and not be a chartered psychologist. Absolutely. People do that all the time. You can go into HR, OD, etc., and just the background can be supportive. But personally, I thought I'd spend so much time in South Africa trying to register and trying to get to that goal that I wanted to do it here while I was also. I think I see it as a bit of a superpower in that sense. And then I just saw there was a question in there. The rest was the BPS and if it's worth it being a psychometrist in South Africa. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to being. I don't think you have to be eligible to be registered with the BPS to practice in the UK, just in general. But you can do the RT, the registered test user piece. I don't know. I don't think that's a prerequisite to be a psychometrist to do that requirement. I would just double check that on the BPS website or guidelines. And I think yes. I'm trying to see how to pronounce your name because I think is it Senecanum? You can be registered in South Africa as a psychometrist, and you can do it's like a 2-day training that you pay for. Again, some organizations will pay for that. It just depends if you're through the door, and then they will pay for you, or if you need that registration to kind of get through the door, if that makes sense.
Josh, can I say one thing just about psychometry here? I have found that if you're wanting to pick up specifically a personality instrument and work with a personality instrument, that test writer or the publisher of that instrument is going to expect that you train with them to be able to use the instrument. Unlike in South Africa, where you are kind of registered, you could pretty much pick up any instrument and run. Here, they will expect that. So SHL will expect you train with them to do anything to do with OPQ. Savile Wave will be the same. Hogan will be the same. So and I don't know if it's the same for ability tests, because I only mainly use personality instruments. But if you are using personality instruments, they will require you to train with them.
Yeah, and I think really the organizations will pay for that also.
Yes.
Unless you're going into your own practice. But yes, and just the piece on the BPS and the HCPC from Kim, I think I was under the impression that you needed to do both. And again, work paid for it. I don't know the exact difference. So the BPS is more just the psychology element, whereas the HCPC is where any professional will go. So as in doctors, dentists, dietitians, I think even physios, they all go in that. And it's almost that, I think that one you have to do, and then you do the BPS as like the secondary one, but I'm not 100% sure. It's a great question, really.
Perhaps we could open the questions up to our other two speakers too, Helgart or Karen, if you have any input on those 3 questions in the chat, that would please do.
Well, someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Shirley, I'm not sure, about that you always, Josh, that you need to get the pack of stuff that you did at university in order to register. So that was fully my plan before I came over, and I'll do a quick intro of myself in a bit, but to get to the question, I was fully planning to do all of that when I came over. Like Josh said, it does cost a bit of money. So if you get the opportunity to be here with the company first and then, let them pay for it, that'll be great. But if you need it in order to secure a role to come over, that's the other side of it. And I honestly, in the work that I do and the kind of space that I work in professional services consulting, I've seen a lot of people that call themselves psychologists, work psychologists, business psychologists, etc. Because the only one that is protected by chartership is occupational psychologists in the UK. And those people all do psychometrics. So not registered with BPS, not registered with the HCPC, but like Nina said, trained through the test distributor, and that allows them to do psychometrics. A lot of people who coach, who don't even have a massive background in psychology, train with the test user and use those instruments for psychology. So I can't give a black or white answer what is required legally. I guess I'll find out when I get there, and I don't use psychometrics myself at the moment. But there's most of the people here that use psychometrics are not chartered with the HCPC, if that helps. But I am fully planning to get my BPS done. And if I can give you any piece of advice, whether you're planning to do it or not, before you leave South Africa, try and get those documents from your university. It'll have to be course by course from first year. You give a bit of a breakdown. You can get in touch with me if you want a bit of a template for that. And then the right person from the university needs to sign it off from the department, which could be the tricky bit depending on where you studied. I was very lucky to stay friends with the admin lady, so that helped. Yeah, so that's as much as I can say to the question, unfortunately. But I can update somewhere when I have done my BPS as well.
Yeah, thanks, I'll just add a little bit. I saw Josh also noted the Association for Business Psychology. So very similar to Nina, I am maintaining my registration in South Africa, and I haven't registered with, you know, the BPS or with the HCPC here in the UK. I do have some colleagues that have also decided, you know, they want to opt more for the business psychology side of things. So you do very similar to the BPS. You also, you know, have to provide evidence of your kind of work experience in that regard to the Association for Business Psychology. And I know a couple of them, you know, have opted for that route and registered and decided they want to take more of the business psychology route instead of, you know, the chartership route. So I think it often depends, obviously, you know, which environment you're working in. There's also kind of a financial implication. So yeah, those are different avenues that, you know, you guys can look at and kind of pursue and get a sense of.
Just to, I think it's Seneca, to the last question you posed there, is there any registration that qualifies you to get a visa to work there? So and the other speakers might jump in and let me know if I'm off track. But I think an HCPC one might be one that, like a doctor or a dentist or a nurse, qualifies you as a psychologist, which would be on the rare skills list. But it's, yeah, the HCPC one is quite a tricky one because it's what's the word that I'm looking for? You'll see even the templates and stuff that they do ask for, it's kind of set up in a clinical way. So there's a lot of evidence we need to give to be able to do that. So there might be easier ways to get a work visa, like using your degree, using your experience to apply to roles. I think the one fact is people are needed here, people with skills and degrees and experience. So that might be the easier route, but I can certainly think that if you do manage to get the HCPC registration, that will go a really long way to helping you secure employment as well. Yeah, I don't know what the rest think, sorry.
I think in my case, and sorry, maybe I can expand a little bit on, you know, my journey to the UK as well. So I was lucky enough to work for an organization in South Africa that obviously has a global footprint as well. So I was working for SHL, and really through that I was able to move to their head office in Thames Ditton, and yeah, you know, worked from that side. I got a skilled workers visa through them as well for that, and then I think about 2 months ago, I moved to a different talent consulting organization, but they are also sponsoring my skilled workers visa. So for me, that was, you know, a little bit of a different route because I had that opportunity from a South African perspective, which I know sometimes is a little bit more challenging, but yeah, definitely if that's something that, you know, anyone would like to pursue, I would say that's also, you know, a good way of trying to do it, because most often they know you already, and it's a little bit easier to, you know, do an internal move than necessarily moving over and then having to find something or find something beforehand. So yeah, that's kind of from my side.
Yeah,
Thanks, Karen.
I guess just from me, I came on, my wife's British, so I came on as a spousal visa. And just, I guess, there's no, in an ideal world, I would have preferred to have gone on a skilled visa or on a sponsorship, because just for transparency, the amount of visas I've paid for, even on a spousal journey, so my wife being British, born here, by the end, I'm just applying for my passport now. It's probably cost between £8,000 to £10,000 over the last 5 years to get here, from all the visa, etc. So it's a very, it's a costly journey regardless, unless you can, ideally, if you can get an organization to sponsor you, I think that is an ideal place. Just quickly on the sponsorship, I'm no expert, but the way it works is I think companies have a certain amount of sponsorship visas they can give out per year, or they're allotted. So it can be quite a tricky process. So absolutely, I think the more hats you can throw in the ring, probably the better to try and secure that sponsorship element.
Yeah, that's true, Joss. And not everyone who, you know, might be like, obviously I have some consulting experience. So, you know, most kind of opportunities I've been looking for have been in kind of that area. So I also know, you know, not all companies provide sponsorship. So sometimes you might have, you know, a recruiter reaching out to you on LinkedIn for opportunities. And one of the first things to kind of check is whether, you know, that organization does provide you with sponsorship, because if not, then obviously that's not going to be very helpful on your journey.
I just said in the chat to Ito's question as well, there is a list of companies who are registered to sponsor. So just also protect yourself. Recruiters, I think, can be, you know, eager to get you to sign up and get on board. And then you might realize down the costly road that they are not registered to sponsor as well. Just to kind of give you hope as well that it can be done from South Africa. So my wife got a job offer out of the blue. She's in a different field than us, but at that stage, I just started reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and one of the people was Nikita. Didn't know him, I just knew he was in the UK, and my questions were exactly these: how do I register? How do I find work? And basically he said, well, I know someone who is looking, and he put me in touch, and it was someone with EY at the time. And yeah, I got a job offer a couple of weeks later while still in South Africa. And they offered me a sponsorship to go along with that as well. So it is possible. That didn't rely on my HPCSA. I've got to get my acronyms right now. Didn't rely on my registration at all. So my background in psychometrics, my background in statistics and facilitation and that kind of thing was very important. So it can be done if you don't also just limit yourself to the field of psychometrics. If you're a psychometrist, look for positions in the kind of general fields of HR, leadership, OD. Yeah, the list goes on and on and on. I've got a lot of people who work with me in that space in consulting. We do leadership consulting, psychometrics, diversity, inclusion, culture, all of those. And a lot of people are ex-British athletes. A lot of people come from teaching, a lot of people. So they kind of, you know, as long as you can do the work here, I found it's not as siloed as I found it to be back in South Africa. So don't just search psychometrist jobs. Sometimes you need a sponsorship to get your foot in the door, and you might actually enjoy what you do as well, and find something in the kind of broader field. So include all of that other experience you've got, not just psychometry, when you're looking at these different positions and companies.
That's brilliant advice, Helgard. One of the things that I found very helpful here is organizations that aren't consultancies or in the field of organizational psychology, such where Josh is or where Helgard is in professional services, value these skills. So they will often in an HR role put in the specifications, degree in psychology, degree in occupational psychology. So broaden what you're looking for slightly, maybe look for talent roles or even talent acquisition roles. They often want people who have this experience. Look for culture roles, look for organizational development roles, not just a pure psych role, because that role you'll probably only generally find in a consultancy.
Or university.
Or at a university, good point, Josh.
But so kind of to echo you, Nina, the besides the talent, the leadership stuff,
Yes.
the DE&I. And I think, as you call it talent acquisition, and in my previous company, they called it resourcing. So just kind of getting into playing around with some of the wording of what you're trying to look for is really helpful. I know Helgard has just gone off, but I wondered if, when he's back, to talk around what you can ask for or expect if you're being sponsored. So could you be put up in a house or in accommodation? I don't know what that, as I said, I came in, my wife kind of helped me that. I don't know, Karen, because you went in-house,
So
what did that look like?
That kind of, I think, depends, and obviously it'll be interesting to hear from Helgard in terms of his experience. But that probably depends from, organization to organization. So some of my costs were covered in terms of, getting me here, but not all of it. So for example, I think my first month's rent was covered, but anything that I wanted to relocate, I had to pay for myself. So my kind of point of view was, I'm bringing anything with, I'm just bringing myself and, kind of what I have in my suitcases and so forth. And then I'll figure it out as I go. So yeah, I think it very often depends. If I look at, some of my South African friends that I've met here in London as well, who work for, are in other roles, work for other organizations. Some of them were put up in accommodation for 2 weeks, and then they had to find their own accommodation. Others kind of get a whole entire relocation package. So I think it's also very dependent in that regard. Helgard, I don't know what your experience was.
Yeah. So as my background is, I've always been in consulting, and for the last 8 years, been kind of a one-man or a couple of men band, couple of people band. So I wasn't working for EY back in South Africa. I think if you do work for the company that's relocating you, there will be a bit of a difference, and you could probably negotiate a bit further, cover moving expenses, cover all of those kind of things. I did get as a minimum 2 weeks hotel accommodation. They give you a number in pounds that I won't mention to get you settled, buy furniture, set up your data contracts, all of that kind of thing. What else was there? There was one more thing that I can't think of now. So try negotiate when you get to that stage, but I think also realize that just sponsoring you is an expensive exercise already for a company. So some of them might not be able to offer a lot more. If you do locate from inside, then yeah, should be easier. I actually have a lot of colleagues in EY at the moment that's come over from South Africa, from the South African branch over, and I know they do quite a lot in terms of setting you up with accommodation, that kind of thing. In Ireland as well, if any of you were looking at Ireland, I know they've had quite a drive in the last couple of months, so it might be useful if you're interested in Big Four consulting. But yeah, sorry, Shirley, your question just caught my eye there as well. I would say that most of the big businesses are in London, even though they might have kind of radar offices. But certainly there's work all over the country. I think in Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham, all of those ones that you mentioned there. You do get here what we don't really know in South Africa is like a London salary versus a regional salary. So the purpose for that is just because London is extremely expensive. So do your research as well. If you've got different offers or different places that you're looking at, just because your London salary is 3 times more, there's a really good reason for that, because London is generally about 3 times more expensive when it comes to rent and those kind of things. But yeah, I mean, wherever you get your foot in the door, if you're looking at companies who sponsor, I'm guessing most of them will have offices in London, but they might be all over. So if you are open to anything else, don't limit yourself just to looking at London.
And the other thing to remember, I suppose, is that London is nowhere near, England is nowhere near the size of South Africa. So you can pretty much travel from anywhere ish from like Manchester, Leeds way down, and from the south coast up into London within 2 hours, 2 hours 20. So a lot of people during the pandemic also chose to move out of London, and they've just made it work. So the transportation here, infrastructure is set up for commuting in and out of London.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think just on that point, Nina and Hilgard, some of the companies, depending on where I've worked in 2 banks, and Nationwide was based out in Swindon. They had one of the head offices, and they had another head office in London. And now we're at NatWest, and we have a head office in Scotland and in London, and a lot of the companies will. You could be based. Say you're off to live in Scotland or wherever you choose to live, wherever one of the companies are. If you have like team meetings you might. A lot of the companies' policies, the bigger companies, they'll probably pay for some of your travel if you're going from out of your regular office base. You can also some companies offer just to be a home-based worker too. So I think really there are lots of policies. What I've noticed is, and I don't know, I didn't work in big companies in South Africa, but I guess some of the companies have got really great policies that look after their people, but that they will pay for your travel. So really, those are things that you can kind of sense check and think through, I think. Yeah, can be really helpful.
You know, Josh, after you speaking there, it makes me think that the most important thing you can do is negotiate everything up front. If you're moving here, if you're moving here without a job and you're going to look for one when you're here, fine. But if you're using that job to move here, negotiate everything. They're used to it, and don't feel shy. The recruiters here, the markets here, they're used to it. They're used to candidates, and it's a candidate market, and they want skilled people. So negotiate, negotiate, negotiate.
What's also great, as you say, negotiate, and what I struggled with when I first came over was trying to work out what salary I should get. So it's really difficult because you might be earning, well, if you're in South Africa, you're earning in rands, and you're kind of working out, well, I don't know, what is the right salary? And what I'd suggest doing is look at a number of companies. Some of them do post the salary bands. So something that, again, I hadn't really heard of it in South Africa, but they've got salary bands that might be really big. So it's salary per year, not per month. You kind of have to think in that way. And some salary bands might be, say, 40 to 60,000 pounds, and you could be somewhere in the middle there. Or you could get, 40 to 80,000 pounds, kind of quite extreme. So that allows you to sort of work out where might you be, and then you can sort of negotiate on either angle.
And I think, as Halgard and Kim said, like Fishbowl and Glassdoor is really helpful to also check that. That does help a lot. It gives you a good sense of whether you'll be able to make it when you have to pay rent as well, or not.
Yeah, or have kids. And I speak to someone who doesn't have kids, but if you stay in London, for instance, and have kids, that's a big expense to think about and do some research about. So yeah, really think about and you might be giving up a 4-bedroom house with a nice garden and 2 cars and pay 4 times as much in London for a 2-bed flat. So do that research. But I mean, I'm making it sound negative now, but it's, for me, the positives have outweighed. And if you're willing to adapt and willing to enjoy what there is to enjoy, then living in a big, crazy place like London is absolutely fantastic. And my wife's actually gotten an offer to move up north to Yorkshire, which is much, much more rural and countryside, and she really wanted to. And I said, oh, please give me 2 or 3 more years in London. So yeah, do your research, see what you enjoy. And but I guess some of the questions that I've received in the past is, I've got an offer at XYZ location. Is it a terrible place? I haven't seen a lot of places in the UK where I would absolutely say I wouldn't be able to live. There's obviously neighborhoods, areas where ideally you wouldn't want to be. But if you think about the different towns and cities and stuff, everything's got its good and got its bad. So if you are just looking for an opportunity to get in, the whole place seems fairly nice so far. Just saying, I've been just here 1 year and 2 months. So yeah.
I think maybe just touching on that as well, Halgard, as you were speaking, I was thinking, I came over on my own, so my first year was pretty much of a roller coaster for me. It had my ups and downs, and I remember one day I was, walking to the train station. I was just thinking, oh my goodness, what did I do? I gave up my car. I gave up, a really nice townhouse with like 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. It had a garden. I gave all of this, and now I'm like in a small little, studio flat. So gave up all of my space, but yeah, I mean, it does go. And I think some of, the friends I made this side as well advised like the first 2 years is a little bit of an adjustment. You have some days that are more challenging than others. But in the end, as Halkart said, very often kind of a lot of the positive aspects outweigh a lot of that as well. And yeah, we've all been through it. We're all in the same boat. So I think, the support that you get from other individuals that have gone through that transition period is also really nice and lovely. Yeah, I think that's just,
And don't forget, on top of that, there are certain expenses we won't have. So for example, you will have in the first few years, depending on what type of visa you're coming on. But your children will get education for free, and you will have the NHS access. I know that South Africans have to pay an NHS levy. All foreigners have to pay an NHS levy coming into the UK until they're residents, but it's nowhere near what you would pay if you're paying for private medical healthcare. Your access to your GP, you get your post. So when you post a letter, you actually get it.
Thing. Yeah.
It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
So there are certain things here that totally outweigh it. There's variety. There's specifically London. It's like a incredibly multicultural, diverse society where you can get anything you want whenever you want. So yes, it's going to be difficult. Yes, there are going to be times that you're walking in the rain thinking, why did I give up my car when I could drive my car to the shopping center to get my food to take it home? And then you're walking with your parcels on the tube and all that kind of stuff. But it's super, super exciting, and there's so much opportunity.
I think to echo Nina, what I've noticed is, so my wife and I have 2 kids, and we have 1 car between us. And when I hear the conversation between me and my brother, who lives in Cape Town, with their cars and, the whole different experience, but I think it is really doable. I think in terms of career growth, I think there is so much opportunity here to grow, whether you want to grow as a psychologist, whether you want to grow as a psychometrist, whether you want to grow in just the HR space. I think there's a massive amount of not only culture and nuances and dynamics, because I think South Africa is really cultural. It's really interesting. The amount of times that you're dealing with different people across Africa can be so intriguing in the work. But I think what I've noticed in the UK is the opportunity to really elevate some of that the thinking, but I guess the opportunities seem to be quite big here. I think there's massive amount of opportunities in South Africa also, but yeah, I think there's a lot of professional growth also here, which I've seen.
Yeah, Josh, maybe just to touch on your point there, sorry, Halkart. I've also, through my experience, not only worked with individuals and organizations that are situated in the UK, so Europe as well, which has been really interesting to see those cultural differences and, to work with clients who are situated in the Netherlands or in Germany, and just kind of get a broader picture, of the world overall, and just see, the little differences that, some of them make, which culture is a little bit more direct than another one. So a lot of that has, for me, been really interesting to just get that exposure, and get a sense of that as well.
Sorry, I was just busy typing a long message to Seneca there, but to sum it up, basically, was it Seneca or Shirley? No, it was Seneca. Oh, have I got? Sorry, Shirley, I just saw that I've been sending you direct messages instead of pasting to the group, so I will go and paste all of my responses to the group as well. Sorry about that. Yeah, probably the most. So I love my job so far, and probably the most rewarding out of everything that I've experienced in the UK, to add on to the last two speakers, is the diversity of experience you'll get. You realize when you get here how small South Africa can be. We all work in mining, sometimes in education, banking, etc. So the diversity of clients you work with, I've worked with multiple international clients. I've traveled quite a lot. My main client at the moment is one that I'm not allowed to speak about. So you get the idea. It's really just so exciting how much there is here, and the kind of things that you get exposed to, especially working for companies in the UK and in London, I would say, having clients from all around the world. So your depth and breadth of experience will blow your mind. At least for me, it has. So sorry, give me a moment while I paste over all of my messages into the public chat.
I think what's nice about that experience and exposures as well, that it challenges you in a completely different way, because you all of a sudden have to rethink how you might frame things, or how you go about dealing with conflict situations with some clients, or differences in opinion. So you grow on kind of that professional and probably personal level a lot as well as an individual. So for me, that's been, I think, one of the rewarding aspects to it. Obviously can be sometimes a bit frustrating, but it's really interesting dealing with individuals that are very different to what you've known from a South African perspective.
Yeah, every meeting that I sit in with my teams, we've got people in different countries speaking different, having different home languages. And it's not just your European countries like you might think. We work with South Africans who are still in South Africa. We work with people from Ireland, teams from Italy, France, everything. So just the breadth of experience and exposure is just, like I said, really, really good. Cool. And sorry, I saw it's only sorry, Simon, I saw it was only the one message. So it hasn't been the whole time that I've just been messaging Shirley.
Perhaps I could ask a question to the group here. Off the back of everything that you've been saying, thank you so much, by the way. It's rich experience to draw on. You guys obviously did a fair amount of research before coming over, a lot of it being practical. But when you guys arrived, what was it that you weren't prepared for? What shocked you and surprised you? And you're like, gosh, I wish I'd known that before I came. Is there anything that ticks that box that maybe you'd be able to share with someone to prepare them in a different way, be it psychologically or mentally?
Well, shucks, on the psychological notes, and once again, I hate to focus on the negatives, but the rental market is absolutely insane, especially as you get closer to London. And I had feedback about this before I came over, and I didn't realize it until I got here. So make sure you've got 6 months of rent if you need to pay up front. Some agents don't care about your credit history in South Africa. They don't care about your references from South Africa, whether you own 3 properties. So be prepared for that. Some people, having said that, get very lucky, and I've heard of people who just walk in without 6 months of rent and manage to secure a place. So psychologically prepare yourself for that. Don't lose hope. Don't throw in the towel, in the first week while you're looking for a place. But certainly for me, that's the one that stands out, Simon. The rest has been fairly easy, I think. Yeah.
I believe.
I don't know if I would say 6 months of rent.
Yeah,
I think that's a bit steep. I think if I was arriving here on my own, if I would think back 17 years ago, I was lucky enough, someone had come before me, so they'd found a flat, an old schoolmate, and we landed up staying together. What I would say is you definitely need a 6-week deposit, without a doubt. That's going to be like non-negotiable. 6 weeks to 2 months deposits, non-negotiable. Yeah. The key thing is I would Airbnb it for the first couple of weeks, so you can kind of check where you want to be in the communities you want to be around and the areas you want to be in. And if you don't have a job, having 6 months rent upfront is a perfectly good advice from Helgard. But I think if you have a job, I'm not sure you're going to need 6 months rent.
I've got to disagree with you.
Okay.
We had that both having full-time employment with work contracts, having savings, having everything. And you'll see a lot on that South Africans moving to the UK group. You'll see a lot of the same stories. It sounds like it's been in the last year or two that it's really increased though,
Okay,
because
fair
of
enough.
the cost of living and bad debt and all of that kind of thing. So
Wow.
yeah, Kim just said that we
It's
had
the
to
same.
pay
Okay, I
6
take it back.
6 to 12.
I take it back.
I
But be
think
prepared
once again,
mentally. Hopefully
Wow.
it doesn't happen, but be
yeah,
prepared mentally.
I would say once again, it's probably very dependent. I was lucky enough that I just had to pay 1 month's deposit. I didn't even have to pay any rent up front. But once again, I mean, I think it's very dependent. As I said, I was lucky in that regard because I know a lot of people who have to put down 6 months rent or even a year's rent. So yeah, it's you know,
Yeah, I
kind
don't
of
know how legal
depends
that is, and
probably
that
where
makes
you're
me cross.
situated.
That makes me very cross. I don't know how legal that is, so that's making me very cross because,
Mhm.
yeah, sorry, that's not very
Yeah,
fair.
the agents don't give a damn what's legal. That's
Yep.
unfortunately you really do struggle, especially
You
as you
do.
get to London and city centers. Yeah.
Yep. No. So yeah, I see Shirley has also said that you know, 6 to 12 months rent upfront, who's been advised on that. I know another colleague that worked with me in South Africa that also came over, and she also had to put down 12 months rent upfront. So yeah, for her family. So they are a family, I think, of 4, and they had to put that down. So yeah, it can be challenging. Apart from that, also securing a place is quite difficult. So, you know, the places go extremely quickly. Oftentimes, if they do advertise, by the time you contact the agency, it's not available anymore. So, you know, don't give up hope. Just continue. Also, look at, you know, I can't remember the site now, but I'll have a look at it in a moment. You know, look at where you can rent directly from a landlord as well. That helps a lot sometimes too. So not necessarily, you know, going through an agency. I know quite a number of, you know, my friends that I've made on this end have done it that way as well. So wherever you can do that, it also helps. I'll check the site now for in a moment. Open rent. Yes, thanks, Helgaard. Yep, that helps. That often helps too.
I think for me, the bit that someone had said to me when moving over was to really move over. So not keeping one foot in South Africa and one foot here, I found quite helpful. So to really almost embed myself in what it is here. I made a thing not to complain about the weather. It rains more, volume-wise, it rains more in Joburg than it does in London, I believe. Like actually volume-wise, it rains more often. But to saying that we've had weather of 30, 29, we have air conditioning because it's so hot sometimes. So I think if you are going to make the move, I think to be fully invested in making the move. So not only from a financial and, you know, all those other things that you're giving up to come, I think also emotionally for me seem to work in that space. I think the other thing that I wish someone had told me before was that it's not going to be as hard as I was making out to be in my head. Yes, it was difficult. Yes, I came from a different circumstance because I was marrying, you know, my wife who has family here, but definitely it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And then just lastly, if anyone is moving over with children or young children, nursery here, if you're looking at, you know, young kids, you kind of have to put yourself on a waiting list when your wife is pregnant or when you are pregnant to try get into the nursery in time. And then schools get quite competitive, depending on, some are faith-based and you need to do certain get certificates of religious practice, and some, as they said, you have to be like in a catchment area, which means like close enough to the school to be in that space. And if you thought if you're from Cape Town, you know, it was always ideal to be by the beach or by the sea or by the mountain. Here it's to be by the tube station is kind of the ideal, not too close so you can hear it, but a 20-minute walk is actually not a bad walk to the tube station. So just having a think about that. There's also a difference between a tube and a train. I know there's the overground, there's the underground. So the tube is the thing that goes under the ground, also known as the underground. The train is overground. It's slightly more expensive. And there's also rush hour. Sorry, last thing. If you take the tube before 9:30 and after, I think 4 or 5, it's more expensive. Otherwise, in between, it's less expensive. But you can check that out.
And nothing really surprised me that I'd wish I'd known before I came. I think it's all pretty straightforward. You come into an English-speaking country with lots of helpful people, and the rental thing wasn't a thing when I came. So if Helgard says it's 6 to 12 months, prepare for 6 to 12 months because he's got more recent experience than me. But otherwise, I would never look back. And I will never look back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, all of our panelists. Before we wrap up, are there any further questions from any of the attendees here that have popped into your mind recently or have evolved from the conversation here? And has this conversation answered all of your queries in your mind? Please feel free to unmute yourselves or pop something in the chat. Any key takeaways? No, well, in that case, what's this? A UK CV template. Yes.
Yeah, so I was just going to mention, just your CV shouldn't be fancy. If you want to reach out to me, I've got some examples as well, so you're more than welcome to do that. Cool.
Yeah.
And also, sorry, I just want to add one thing. I head up talent acquisition at The Body Shop, so I know LinkedIn is probably the place where you're going to find your job. It's an incredible thing, so make sure your profile is up to date, boost your profile, put your experience in there. A lot of the companies will allow you to transfer your information from LinkedIn straight into their CV database, so you don't have to fill in tons of forms. And yeah, so I would say if you can utilize LinkedIn, please do.
Great advice. Yeah, it is a fantastic platform. Well, thank you ever so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you so much for our panelists for sharing your experiences and your knowledge and your wisdom. We'll be popping this recording onto the Psychology at Work blog YouTube, so we can, if you tell your friends if they manage to miss it, or it's a good resource going forwards. But thank you once again, everybody. It's been a real pleasure to hear your stories. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for setting it up. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Cheers.
all.
Thanks, everyone. Good
Bye.
luck.
Bye.